3 questions. Are you a self-starter? Do you like being bossed around? And lastly, what does true freedom feel like? Welcome to my channel, That Michelet Guy. If you've never been here before, what exactly do? We read the book of Proverbs. We read it slowly, word by word, term by term, in its mother language, Hebrew. Hebrew is a very complex language. Most of these terms have layers of meaning, and when they get translated into English, usually they stick to one meaning and miss the others. What we do is we go back in and we try to restructure them in their full context. So we will go ahead and jump into today's lesson. This one comes from Proverbs 12:24. The King James Version English translation is, "The hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute." So if we had to summarize this in a single sentence, what would we do? We'd say that hard workers rise to the top and the lazy people get left behind. And that'd be an adequate teaching. That's what most people would walk away with, and they'd quickly move on to the next proverb. But that's not what we do. So we are going to look at this in Hebrew now. In Hebrew, this is Yad karet sim tim shol uremiyah tiyelamas. And word by word in a concordance, that is hand, diligent, they shall rule, but slackers, they will become forced labor. So our first term, yad, it means the hand, and it's the subject. It's a construct noun. What it's going to do is it's going to tell us what does the work, and then later on merits the rule. So there's no primitive root here. This is a core term, and anytime you see the word yad, the hand, it's almost always symbolic, because the hand is what shapes things, it's what changes things, it's what produces things, and it's what controls things. So in those contexts, it can mean a variety of things. So it can literally mean the actual anatomy, the human hand. But in the metaphorical sense, it's about agency, it's about power, it's about authority and possession and control. It's about the actual capacity and capability to do something. It's about responsibility. And the hand is what takes what's the intention inside and turns the external thing into reality. And so in that sense, this word yad in this particular proverb, it's a bridge term because it can mean both things. It can mean that the actual work being done, the tasks being undertaken, or it can mean the authority being exercised. So the proverb always establishes with that leading term what the foundation is. So this is about what the hand will do. It's going to do both of these things. It's going to work and to rule. So this is a proverb about action and merit, about earning its position, about applying itself. And the proverb is going to connect the next term, which is diligence. And it wants us to understand that achievement requires follow through, that it's not the difference between working and not working. It's a difference between purposefulness and aimlessness, and the difference between focus and distraction on being disciplined or undisciplined. And so what it's saying here is this diligent hand has been proven worthy of promotion, because the first thing that he conquered was his own self. He rules his own desire to slack off. He overcomes lethargy. He finishes the job. And by striving for this greater proficiency, he's perfecting his craft. He's working tirelessly. And so diligence, in that sense, it's not a trait that you claim, it's a trait that you demonstrate and perform. And the handiwork and the effort and the dedication, they're visible, they're tangible as what the hand is producing. So our next term, karutzim, and so this is one of those substantive adjectives. It can be an adjective or it can be a noun. Here it's going to be the nominal form, and this is who the hand belongs to. And when you see words in this I am, that means it's plural. So this is a class of people, and the primitive root here comes from a term karetz, which means to cut, to sharpen, to be industrious, or to determine. And so it's very similar to our concept, where if we said somebody was sharpened to the point, it would also mean that they are very decisive. And the idea is that someone who is a karutz, they don't get distracted, they don't drift. They are the opposite of dull or having a vague idea of what they want to do. They have a very clear vision. They don't meander and they don't leave things unfinished. And so in English, this term diligence, it's more about the labor and the effort, but karutz in Hebrew, this is more about the mindset itself. And basically it is possible to be very busy and active, but inefficient. And a karutz, not only they're going to be busy, but they're going to be laser focused. And because of this, they're efficient, they're precise, and this gives them competence. They can take on very difficult tasks and still get it done. And they're capable of, tremendous amounts of responsibility and increased duties because they outpace other people. And it's this level of discipline that's making them worthy of this promotion and to exercise authority, because they're not just working hard, they're working with purpose. And this is a trait of character. And that's what the Proverbs like to do. They like to establish types, classes, and patterns. And this is a karutz is somebody who has shown a pattern that they will master their own impulses and distractions. And it's saying that if you want to be an effective leader, you're going to need to develop this particular trait, diligence. And the proverb does not want us to imagine that the difference being the difference between working or not, but it wants us to think of it as possessing an internal drive or not. And so diligence in that sense is a matter of character, not actions. Although the actions will come because the character's there. And it's a very rare and desirable trait. And basically a yad katzim it means that this is somebody who's not just a thinker, they are a doer. So our next term, timshol. So this is an imperfect tense, and it's in the cow form, which the cow form is what establishes patterns, what generally happens, but it gets translated as shall rule because this is something that's going to happen in the future. And this will be the position of this person with the diligent hand later on down the line. Primitive root is mashal, which means to rule or to govern or to make a comparison. That's actually where we get the term mishle, is from this verb mashal. And they all come from the same root, and so therefore every one of these proverbs are about ruling. And the whole idea is we have to keep in mind Solomon's a king. He's leaving these proverbs behind because he knows his descendants are also going to be kings, and he doesn't want his wisdom to die with him. He wants to leave this record for them to live by. So in that sense, every proverb is about leadership, and the first thing that we learn to govern is ourself, and it's going to require diligence. As this is the idea that we work on our character traits, our midot. And the proverbs stress this character development because what we're trying to do is we're wanting to eliminate bad traits and increase good traits. And over time, this is going to decrease our amount of error. So this is what wisdom actually is. It's this lack of errors. It's this kind of precision. It's this skill at navigating life and knowing what actions to take. And that all begins with knowing why things either fail or succeed. And here it's establishing that diligence is one of these very necessary ingredients, that there's no success without it. And there can be no dominion. There will only be servitude if you are lacking in it. And the proverb is establishing that the one ruling has worked tirelessly to achieve it. They didn't wait for it to materialize. They set a plan in motion and they completed it. And it's developing diligence as a character trait is what prepared them for this. They were prepared for the responsibility before they actually held it. And it's saying that this is an eventuality. They shall rule. It may not be immediate, but the certainty is not in doubt. They're going to get there, and they're going to rule because they have usefulness. They have proven themselves to be very reliable and finish tasks. And a lazy person is going to have labor imposed upon them by others, but a karutz, they're going to impose it on themselves. And eventually, this character trait yields freedom and mobility. And in the contrast, which we're going to see in the second half of the proverb, the remiyah, he becomes subject to the rule of others. Therefore, he's under their mercy. And someone else is going to set the terms if you're not the one who develops diligence. And so this is a very early articulation of a concept called will to power, made very famous later on by philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, but no, this was thousands of years before. It wasn't a new concept. So our back half of the proverb is it's going to follow the form of a contrast where the first part of it shows us what the good thing is, and the second half of this is going to be the warning, what to avoid, what the bad thing is. So this term, uremiyah, means but the slacker, and this is the subject, it's a contrast, and this is the person who, in this part of the proverb, will see that they're going to lack options, and they're going to be forced to do menial labor. And it is also a substantive adjective in the nominal form, but the primitive root, ramah, it means to be loose, to be negligent, to be deceitful, or to lack integrity. So this also is another multi-layered term, and each of the contexts are important, which is why we read these in Hebrew, because the layered meaning in this particular proverb is going to be very, very vital. But the central idea behind all of these different contexts is that the person who's a remiyah, they're an undependable person. They will fail, and it can come from a variety of these reasons that are packed into this term, ramah. But it's mostly because they're not a serious person, and they can't handle responsibility. And so if you give this person something important to do, they're going to fail to complete it. And they have looseness in areas where firmness is required, mainly in their dedication and their own morality even. So they have low standards for their workmanship. They're very relaxed. They fail to complete tasks. I think we all know that person who doesn't take things too seriously, but the remiyah, they'll lie and say things that are completed that aren't, and they are sloppy. They miss the important details. They're neglectful, and they're also a person who's a remiyah. They're morally flexible. They're willing to commit fraud. They just lack integrity in general. And the whole idea is that this is a person who cuts corners and lacks precision. And again, just like the charutz, it's not a matter of the level of activity. This is about the level of character. And so this person is unreliable for a wide variety of reasons. And because of that, they require a taskmaster. Someone's got to stay on them and go behind them and make sure they're doing things, because left on their own, they have this very low trajectory. And so because they did not develop diligence, it means that they will lose autonomy. Someone's going to be the boss of them. And this low level of agency means they're going to be bossed forever. They can't set the terms on anything in life. And so they're always at the mercy of the circumstances and whoever the individual boss may be. So the proverb wants us to view negligence as something that's morally serious, and that subjection is this consequence because the person lacked discipline and integrity. And rule and servitude are actually things that begin internally before they'll ever appear externally. So our next term, tiye, and that is our verb. It means that this is what's going to happen in the future to the slacker. And it's also in the cow form, which is going to establish what the pattern typically is. And so this is a habitual tendency, and it means the ending is predictable. The primitive root, hiye, it's a very common verb. It means to be, to become, or to exist. And what the proverb is saying is that long-term slackness will end here. There's not a variety of options where slackness can take you. It's this and this only. And it's very much establishing cause and effect, what its action of having slack in your life is going to produce. In its final form is subjection and powerlessness. And freedom was an option before, but now it's not. And because this person has failed at diligence, their life is now being set on terms that someone else is setting, that they're going to have a reduced menu of options. And the tendency in life is that the person who's going to set those options for him is not going to be a kind person. So he is well on his way to being conscripted and worked very hard. And this verb is basically advancing the storyline, that this outcome was not random, that it followed this well-established pattern. So it was a formula. He ended up where everyone does, subjugated. So our final term is lamas, and it means forced labor, and it's the direct object. So this is what the person who's the remia, what he's going to become. And it's got a prefix preposition la, which means towards or to, and then mas, which means a levied workforce. And there's no primitive root here on this word mas. It has a wide contextual range, but each of these contextual ranges all come to mean that this is involuntary servitude. And mas is not the same as chattel slavery, so we wouldn't necessarily say that you would become a slave, we'll say that you become a mas. And to really understand that, you have to understand how levying worked in the ancient world, that occasionally these emperors, they'd want to do these massive projects. Maybe they want to build a highway, maybe they'd want to build a monument, a temple, but they would call up any loose hand around, somebody who didn't have a job or an important job. It's like, hey, you can handle a shovel, get to work. And they didn't have regular work hours. So, once the project was done or they didn't need you anymore, you were released. And, but if you're called up, you had no way to refuse. They wouldn't accept any excuses. And basically, this is what the Israelites were under, a system of conscripted forced labor in Egypt. And when you don't have any leverage, you have no way to refuse. So a lot of times this would be imposed on people when, say, their army would lose, and the conquering army would say, okay, well, every available man, now you're going to just be put to work. And so in that sense, mas was not just about labor. It was also about political dominance. It's about submission. It's about bossiness. It's somebody telling you what you have to do. And in those situations, someone who was very important or very skilled, who had a very valuable job, they could say that they were exempt from levy work. And the person who had no skills means that they have no job security, and so they have to wait for these tasks. And they got called up as surplus labor. And because of this, they lacked dignity and agency. They were just forced to take what they could get. They're at the bottom rung of society, and they don't have the capacity to direct any part of their own life. And so someone who's in mas, they're somewhere between a beggar and a slave. But this is the idea of the burdens are placed on them. Life is going to be much harder for them. They will have no say in anything. And basically, lamas would be the ancient way to say that this is a dead-end job. This is something with no future. You're going to live a tough life, little reward, because you had no goals, you had no drive, and the eventual ending point is you now have no freedom either. So now that we understand these terms in their individual context, typically what we do now is we take a little step back and we look at the actual structure of the proverb itself, and we see that Solomon is this incredibly gifted writer that usually 6, 7, 8 words, he can have 3, 4, 5 multiple strings of thought of how he's arranging these. And we'll see that there's actually a logic within the text itself when we look at it this way. Okay, and so the first of the concepts that we see in the contrasting form is the character development of the two people themselves. So the idea of being diligent versus being slack, and understanding that Hebrew base word of karutz is very key. It means cutting. So this first man, he gets straight to the point. He has direct, very sharp movements, very sharp pivots, and it's this decisiveness, this follow through, this dedication to where he's able to articulate goals and plans and then accomplish them. And then by contrast, we see the other word, remia, and also it has multiple meanings, one being loose and the other being dishonest. So this person, they lack precision. They have loose morals. They're not serious. They don't have a plan. They're improvising. They're up to suggestion, and because of this, they're unreliable to finish tasks. And so they require a taskmaster, someone standing over them to boss them around before they'll be productive. And this idea of this weak grip means everything slips out of their hand. The second big contrast that we see is the agency being exercised by the two people. On one hand, you've got rule, and then on the other hand, you've got the idea of subjection. And so the diligent man, he's competent and productive, and he's shaping his own conditions. He's exercising agency. He's a very active person. He's not passive, and he is setting the agenda. And because of this, he has the capacity to rule and lead other people. But the second man, he's not productive. He's unable to rule anybody because he can't even rule his own self. And so because of that, someone has to come in and assume all the responsibilities, and his conditions are going to be shaped by people who are decisive, and he has no leverage, and therefore he forfeits all of his agency and therefore all of his freedom. And that's really what this proverb is about, is the mental preparation that happens ahead of time for either being independent or totally dependent. Third concept that we see contrasted is the obligations themselves. Does he impose them on himself, or are they externally imposed upon him? So the cottage seam, the diligent man, he doesn't wait for directions. He doesn't need someone to push him. His activity level is chosen by him. And this high personal drive means that he's got this very high capacity for achievement. But the remiyah, the slack hand, his activity level is chosen for him, not by him, for him. He gets bossed around, whereas the first man, he is the boss. And he didn't do this voluntary work ahead of time of working on his own character and developing diligence. So now he has to do everything under compulsion and for a very low wage. And then the last thing that we see being compared is the mobility of the two people. Do they have options, or are they stuck? And it's really looking at the two verbs, I think, is the big way to understand, is that the first clause, it's about the actions the man takes. But then in the second clause, that tiyeh, it means he has become. So the first man, he has a separate identity from his actions. But the second man, his actions and identity are bundled. They're the same. There's forced labor. There's no freedom. And so what's really happening here is this diligent man has lots of options. He's got freedom of movement, but the slack man is stuck. He takes whatever he can get, and he can't change his own position in his life. He has become mas, this forced labor. And it was a process to get there. This didn't happen all at once. And the idea is that decisions were made multiple times by both people. And so this is really about the mindset. It's about the character. The second man thought and acted like a slave, so he became one. He waited around for someone to tell him what to do, and that's exactly what form his life takes. But this diligent man, he was applying effort ahead of time to not become this. He got up and grinded. So as a result, he has more freedom, more mobility, and he's not stuck as a minimum wage worker. So we could spend all our time here looking at the contrast and the layers, but we do have to move on and go ahead and recap it. So to recap here, Proverbs 12:24, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute. Quick takeaways. Number one, failure to develop diligence means that you're going to have a smaller menu of options in your life. You can either be lazy or you can be influential, but you will not be both. And the idea is that committing to industriousness and character development is going to prevent these two things, dependence and subjection. Number two, diligent is not just activity for the sake of activity. That's just staying busy. But diligence is going to involve a certain level of planning, to have a vision, and to have a long-term commitment. The diligent are capable of greater things because they're not wasting their time or their effort. They set their goals and then they achieve them. And then the last thing, the first thing that you learn to rule is your own self and its own tendency to lose focus or relax. And you're not worthy of exercising authority over other people if you're not willing to commit yourself to the internal character work that precedes and is demanded by being in a position of responsibility. Okay, and so the first of the guided talks is what we call the dad talk. And the dad talk is exactly what it sounds like. It's fatherly advice. It's where we take this proverb at its face value and we look at what it's talking about in the real world. And we look for the principles and identify them and then form it into a tool that we can use to navigate life. So if you just take these basic principles and put them into practice, you'll be a wiser person day one. So this is a proverb about personal drive. It's about achievement, and it's pretty straightforward that talent alone will not be enough. At a certain point, you're going to have to apply yourself if you want to succeed in life. And if you do not apply what you're doing, then whatever talent you have gets wasted. And if you do this frequently enough, then it ends up being freedom itself that is lost. And wishing for something is not the same thing as working for it. And so that's a big thing that's going to separate the diligent from the slack, is that they're able to make a plan and stick to it. And it's very easy to stand out if you can develop those two aspects, because most people don't do them. They coast and they land wherever they land and they settle for it. And even an average person, you don't have to be a genius. If they just apply themselves, you can, at a bare minimum, get out of the bottom. You can escape servitude if you just have enough sustained effort. And brings us to the second aspect of this is what does forced labor look like in the 21st century? Well, modern slavery looks like doing menial tasks and living at the margins of society. So being at the bottom in a place like America, it basically means you're going to have no leisure, that you're going to have to work so much harder and you're going to get so much less. And you do this over the course of your whole life. It really grinds you down. It's really, really hard. And so that's where this proverb really wants us to stress, is that not taking this part of life seriously. If you take shortcuts, you don't get an education, you don't develop a trade, if you do something stupid and end up with a criminal record, all of this stuff is going to limit your options. And if you don't take this aspect of life seriously, you can be guaranteed that you're going to live near the bottom and you're going to just have to settle for whatever you can get. And the regret is what sets in after it's too late to realistically change it, is that these are the decisions that you make in your youth that set you on this path. And by the time you figure out that you didn't take life seriously, it's usually pretty late. So you have to learn that you're going to work for yourself or you're going to get worked by someone else. And then that's kind of the last part of this proverb is Solomon, he was trying to stress to his son the idea that there's a certain level of fitness that has to be in place before you can rule, and that the idea is that a position of inheritance won't last. Someone's going to outwork and pass you, and the proverb doesn't tell us what the overall character of the person is who's ruling, only that they were committed to work very hard to achieve it. And that's great when you have a morally tempered person, a Sadiq, in that position. But a lot of times it's a Rasha, that evil people are willing to work day and night to acquire power, and they will assume all of these positions of authority if diligent people forfeit this ground to them. And it's a big reason why the world looks the way that it does, is that many men are simply passive, whereas evil people are not. They're active and they go for it. And that's why the world looks the way that it does. Okay, and so the second of the talks is what we call the Lev talk. And the Lev is the Hebrew word for the heart. And when we first launched the channel, we did a big explanation on what all the heart does, from the idea of it being the internal governor. So when we look at these proverbs, we're really looking for where can we take that wisdom and apply it internally. So the heart is this battlefield, and it interfaces with all the different aspects of life. And it's why we depict it as this parent wrangling with a child and a dog at the same time, because the heart also has its own internal battles. And between these three things, it's very easy for the heart to lose discipline or focus. And that's why it's very key to understand the dual meaning in this proverb of remiyah, because it's going to contain these two things that are going to hinder character development: discipline and ethics. So the heart has its own entropy, and it fails inwardly before it ever fails outwardly. And what this proverb is showing us is these two different approaches to self-imposed discipline. And what we're wanting to do is we want to be the Haruts, the one who cuts a path, not a person who drifts around like the Remiyah. So the Remiyah, he's not just lazy, he's deceitful. He convinces himself in his own heart that he's worked hard, but he hasn't. And this is very evident in the area of character refinement. And that's actually going to be the very first place that diligence will be applied, is that this diligent person is going to understand that self-development and inner work must also be done. And that's what these proverbs do. They show us where to apply diligence. They show us where we are slack. And we become slack by practicing slackness. That's what reinforces it. And so to counteract slackness, we need to identify two things: the source and then the form it's taking. So the sources: the heart itself can be slack, the body can be slack, the spirit can be slack, but a combination of these means that the entire soul itself is being slack. And then the forms that it can take is if you see slackness in the work, the effort, the applying of oneself, that's usually the body is the part that's being slack there, because the body loves comfort. But if it's showing up as remiyah and in the forms of immorality and dishonesty, well, then that's going to be more a matter of spirit and heart. And then when we identify what form and source are it's taking, then we can focus on the refinement of it. And the body wants comfort. It hates work. And the heart itself will have other interests and desires. And so working is what draws it away from those pursuits. So that's usually where it's at, is somewhere in the heart and the body. And most of the time, a slack person, they convince themselves that, oh, I'm going to get around to it. And so a lot of times this slackness is just going to be a matter of procrastination. They give themselves permission to skip the work, and they'll settle for close enough. They're willing to submit sloppy or unfinished work. And because this internal need for precision was never their goal, neglect was going to be the natural outcome. And the Remia, they're the king of excuses. They will tell you, oh, I was going to do it, or they come up with something that prevented them. Oh, see, here's what happened. And they're good at lying to others because they first of all became good at lying to themselves first. And because they make these habitual compromises, they're training this deceitfulness to be instinctive. And the Remia, at their heart, they think that intention is the same thing as effort. And that's why the deceitful range of this term in Hebrew is so pivotal. It's why we study them in Hebrew, because we would miss it if we didn't. And to overcome this, we, number one, must acknowledge that it exists. And number two, understand what its consequences are. And so that antidote is in this proverb. It's telling you need to understand what karuts is. You need to understand that it carries this image of sharpness, and a sharp tool is what cuts very cleanly. Is a sharp person acts decisively. They don't delay starting the project, and they do not quit before it's finished. And that's what karuts does. It cuts right through the you-know-what. They do not make excuses. They work until it is done right, stay focused, and do not drift. And that is diligence. And in order to be diligent in that way, it means you're going to have to say no a lot, because you're going to have to tell yourself no to comfort and no to quitting. And it's the body that wants comfort, the spirit wants the sin, and the heart has its own desires. But this disciplined person, they're going to train themselves to overcome this tendency of Remia by saying no, 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 no. And that's that first victory over slackness, is refusing to lie to yourself or have magical thinking. The second victory is going to understand that the challenge will always be to relax or stop short of the goal. And if a person only does what they feel like, he gets ruled by his own appetite and comfort. And diligence trains the lev, the heart, to obey wisdom. And then after that, then the heart can turn around and tell the hand to complete the task, no matter how hard it is. And that's why we study the Proverbs the way that we do, because it's a diagnostic that enables us to see where we are too loose, and so that we can replace the Remia with a diligent hand. And that's effective internal rule. That's the alignment of the lev. The modern world calls this whole process self-improvement, but it's ancient and it's holy. It's refinement. And this is constant growth from refining your own character. And that comes through seeking his righteousness, which we find many of them in the Proverbs themselves. Okay, and the place where we finish out the video on guided talks is what we call the Ruach talk. The Ruach is the Hebrew word for the spirit. And we've looked at the wisdom on its surface as the practical application. We've looked at the internal wisdom to apply for internal self-governance. But this is where we're looking for the universality of God's message from cover to cover of the Bible. Where's there uniformity between the Old and the New Testament? And when we look at that, that means where do we see Jesus? Where do we see something that he taught, something that he modeled? Where do we see anything in the New Testament that lines up with this Old Testament wisdom? And the Proverbs rely very heavily on metaphor and symbolism. And when you read enough of them, there's certain common themes that will emerge. And one is this whole idea of servitude. And here the form it took was mas. That's the name for the system itself of conscripted forced labor. And our ears should perk up anytime we encounter this idea in a symbolic way, because the denial of freedom is usually symbolic for a reason. And the idea is powerlessness, that it's the idea of having no choice, that there's a crushing weight to it, that there's no end to it. And that is why sin is likened to slavery, because it's something that is imposed on us and it weighs us down, and it's a very cruel master. And that's one of Paul's most powerful chapters in the entire Bible, is the 6th chapter of Romans, where he talks about this extensively, this whole concept of slavery to sin. And what that does is it reveals that who you obey is who you serve. And he'll use this language all over his letters. And understanding this metaphor is a key to understand the entire New Testament, is the yoke of bondage, and then what it means to have that yoke broken. Because that's one of sin's greatest deceits. It promises increased leisure, but what it actually creates is slavery. And just like the slack hand in this proverb, that the person who's weighed down by sin, they end up with no mobility and no autonomy at all. And it feels like a net, that the slave recognizes he cannot free himself, and it's going to require an outside liberator. And many times in the ancient world, this took the form of what they called redemption, which was a release by payment. Someone would come in, buy the slave, pay the cost. And so that imagery is used all throughout the New Testament as well. As Christians, we recognize that Jesus is our Redeemer. He's the one who paid the price. He's our liberator. He's the one who took us out of slavery. And he doesn't say that he's going to make the bondage a little less strenuous. He says, I'm going to take you out of Egypt entirely. And he's not saying that your bosses will remain in place, but I'll make them a little less cruel or the lashes sting less. He's saying you don't serve them anymore at all. So why do we still fail? Because there's slackness in our life. Remia, this whole idea of looseness. And it's very possible to be redeemed, to be positionally free, but to still not feel like you are free yet. And the reason this happens is when we don't take the battle against sin seriously, when we are lax, when we lack this ongoing diligence. And the big thing with sin is that you cannot escape a place that you go and frequently visit. There's a part of you that still lives there. And so when we look at this spiritually, we'll understand that the battle doesn't end at redemption or receiving forgiveness. That's where it actually begins. And for a Christian, this is the first time ever in your life that the fight will actually be fair, because you'll have the Holy Spirit training you. But at the end of the day, the power is the Holy Spirit's, but you're still the one who has to exercise the diligence on your own because you want it. And so the power is not yours, but the acts of diligence are. Forming the mindset is. And just like this proverb established, someone is going to rule and someone is going to work. And the question is always, who is going to do each task and to what ends? So the believer isn't diligent in order to become redeemed. He's diligent because he has been redeemed. He now has a reason and a purpose to be diligent about this battle. And the whole idea is that spiritual diligence, this is the redeemed individual refusing to obey or even make peace with the former master. So spiritual discipline is making the word no a major part of your vocabulary. And that's where understanding haruts, that it means to cut. It trims out whatever doesn't need to be there, whatever's unnecessary. And diligence at the spiritual level begins when the believer stops treating his sin as tiny and consequential and instead engages it as a rival power that must never be allowed to rule or to share space with them. And the difference between walking in spiritual freedom or being in shackles is going to have the same principle, is that the level of slack or negligence you have in this area determines how heavy this walk is going to feel. The best part is, the most difficult aspect of it has already been done. Christ has lifted the curse, and he left his spirit behind to dwell inside you and fight the battle for you. But all he wants you to do is continue to seek him with diligence. That's all he's asking. Discipleship, discipline. And you learn his ways with diligence. You apply his teachings to your life with diligence. You fight sin with diligence. You take it all very seriously. And you learn continual repentance and continual spiritual discipline. That's the sharpening. That's the haruts. That's the diligence. And the truth is that sin itself is very diligent. That's why it rules most people. And sin's diligent hand is serious, and they are not. Sin goes to work, and they hit the snooze button. Sin is relentless, and that's also why we can't do it alone. In our own diligence, in our own effort, we're still going to fail. And that's why a person has to be born again of the Spirit, because that's where the power is. That's what plugs our cord into the outlet and gets the juices flowing. But luckily for us, Jesus held the most diligent hand to ever live, and it's why he rules. He never let himself become slack, not even once. His entire life was lived with purposeful obedience, with precision. He didn't drift. There was unflinching resolve. He had complete commitment to the task his Father had given him, and he proved his worthiness to rule by his sinless life, by the diligence required to pass each test and never fail. And that's what we see, is that perfection, the completion of the work, his diligence, his discipline every time we look and we see that empty cross. And that's the big thing spiritually, is Jesus does not want us to passively admire his discipline from a distance. He wants us to follow him closely and imitate it. And Jesus lets us know that his yoke is not like this forced labor, that his is light, it's easy, and we just need to wear it and take off the one that sin wants to place on it. But when we learn from him, if we take repentance seriously, we show diligence, and we submit our lives to this much gentler ruler, the only slack in the line is what we introduce, because His grip is firm and it will never let go. So yeah, just tighten it down. And that's where I would end this lesson. Is I hope you got something out of it, and that it connected, that you're getting lots from this channel, then the teaching that goes out. I always say that the world is a very dark place. It requires the gospel to go out and light it up. It's also a place where foolishness reigns, and that's where the Mishle come in. That's where the wisdom helps to correct that and fight and battle against it. And so that's just real easy evangelism, is to let other people know that this is a channel where the Word of God is opened faithfully and consistently and honestly and openly, and we look for ways to help others. And that's kind of the comparison that we make, is that life is this big giant test, and God doesn't just want you to pass the test, He wants you to ace it. And so that's what He does. He gives you the answers ahead of time. That's the Mishle. And it's great when we pass our own test, but it's even better when we let someone pass theirs too. So yeah, go out, spread the word. If there is a proverb that you'd like to see broken down in this long form way, you can email me at thatmishleiguy@gmail.com, ThatMishleigui@gmail.com. We'll put it in the queue and we'll get around to it. But yes, life is very painful if you live in folly, and God's word is there to keep us away from these patterns. And you'll continue to make mistakes in life, but if you listen to Lady Wisdom's voice today, it no longer has to be having a slack hand. You can be the diligent man. Shalom, shalom.